Alright, we are now live. Okay, welcome everybody to the 7th episode of the Full Novel Podcast. Today we have a lot going on. We have a huge amount of episodes to record. Big marathon, 3 in one day. It's a lot. So, although this is the 7th episode, this is the first one of the series that we will be recording, and we'll get the other two later tonight. Today, this is the first time we are doing topic discussions, as opposed to just question picking and choosing of just random discussion. So hopefully that format will work out, and we'll see how these next 3 episodes play out. Today's topic actually is ignoring the characters, personalities, and plot of a visual novel. What makes for a good visual novel? What sorts of elements, what sorts of gameplay mechanics, things like that actually make a good visual novel. So, while I could talk about that for an hour straight, because, everyone wants to hear me talk for an hour about my own opinion, I decided to bring with me, as usual, 3 special guests that are on our podcast today, and they will be introducing themselves here. I have Down, who is moderator on the Foo Novel forums. I have Palace. I'm not really sure. I'm going to say Palace. And I also have the Major with me today. And so if you guys just want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, one of you can just jump right in and start. Give us a fun fact about yourself, where you're from, and just who you are and why you're here. I don't know, why do you love visual novels? Go ahead.
Well, hello, I'm Down. I'm from France. And, well, basically I'm here because I like to rant about random stuff on the internet.
Seems legit. All right. Welcome, Down.
Hello, I'm Paulus. I am Brazilian, and my accent, yeah. But, I'm sort of a newcomer to Full Novel, but I hope I can get along with you guys.
Sounds good. Major.
Hi, I'm the Major from the United States. I'm kind of a newcomer to visual novels in general, so I hope I can contribute to this at least a little bit. And
It's funny. It's funny because I didn't realize what your name meant. I just wanted to go on this rant because I've been thinking about this because we were watching Ghost in the Shell, and then I finally went, oh my god, it's the Major from the Ghost in the Shell. And I was like, I did not realize that for the longest time. And I was like, so sorry.
Big Ghost in the Shell fan.
We're watching it, but we'll go into that later. But I was just curious to point that out. All right, guys, so here's how this is going to work. What's going to happen is I'm going to ask you guys some questions. I'm going to open up the floor and say, just randomly pick one of you to address the question, and then feel free to open up your thoughts. You guys can butt in with your own questions, whatever you want to do. So I guess we'll just get started right away. So the question was, ignoring the character's personality and plot of the visual novel, what makes for a good visual novel? What sorts of elements, what sorts of gameplay, and things like that. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask about that is, in a visual novel game, common routes, we're all familiar with common routes, I'm sure. Common routes can play a crucial role in establishing the characters and setting up the main plot of the actual game. In your opinion, what do you think makes a good common route? How much common route is too much, and what sorts of elements lead to bad common routes? And this can lead to what kind of jokes do you prefer? Are there too much of one joke, too little comedy, too serious? Perhaps there's a main heroine of the game that you obviously know is the main heroine, the first heroine introduced. They're obviously the main, arc of the story, because some games have that. How much main heroine screen time do you think is too much in a common route? How much, side characters do you like to see? Do you prefer a lot of pointless scenes without heroines? So I guess we'll just start with the basic, just because I asked a lot of questions there. In your opinion, what do you think makes a good common route? So Down, I'll open this question up to you to start. What do you think makes a good common route in a visual novel?
Usually I like how it's done, for example, in Jisenjo no Mao or in Grisaya no Kajitsu. Basically, when you have a common route, and at different points you can branch off into a route, because if you just have one common route and then at the end you have several choices and suddenly get into other routes, you don't always know if you should replay the whole common route or I don't know, if the common route branches off at different points, I think it's better. For example, currently I'm playing the common route of Grisaia no Kajitsu, and I really like how it's done so far. It's really funny, but more than anything, I like how it breaks down things in little scenes of daily lives, because well, you know that there's gonna be some drama going on during the character routes, and by making you feel during the common route that time is passing, we see lots of days passing by, we get to know the characters. It really helps build relationships between the characters. I think it's an important thing. It's an important thing, and well, it's done pretty well there.
Okay.
What could I?
Well, you mentioned. Sorry, I'm gonna butt in there because you mentioned. You had mentioned that you like it where common routes have points where they, when you finish a route, you want something that's kind of definite to be able to go back to, so you don't know if you're supposed to read the common route again or not. Do you feel that you like games where there's like an established point at the end of every common route that you know you're going into a route, such as like a scene? For example, in Hoshimemo, there is a scene that always happens, and it's always the mark of when the next route starts. And in fact, every route starts with the same kind of scene. It's an inner monologue from the character, the actual character of the route. It's not given from the protagonist's point of view. And so you know, hey, I've hit a route, or I know I'm in this route. Do you prefer that in games, or do you like it where it's kind of just each one's unique, so you have to actually go back, get to the choices, and then you kind of have a little more common before you go into the route, or you just kind of like a set point?
Well, basically, what I dislike is to have to read again a lot of random stuff. I think it's not very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that.
Okay. Well, what do you think, Major? What do you think of good common routes?
Well, pretty much everything that Down said.
I mean, you can start with examples, like name a game, and you're like, I love this common route, and here's why.
Well, let's see. I'm currently reading Steins Gate, and that's, I'm having fun with that common route.
I heard Steins Gate's really confusing.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of finding what routes you're going down, so that's all I remember hearing about that game.
Yeah, that's besides that, how the decisions are made, which is a pain.
Okay. I mean, Paulus, what do you think? This is kind of just basic good common route. You can just name some of your favorites. If you can't, if you agree with the points of Down, or do you disagree in some of those points?
I do agree. Yes, but it depends, really. It's hard to separate the plot from the structure of the visual novel, but for instance, you have Clannad. Clannad has a really interesting common route because you have a really huge discretionary space. You can make lots of choices and everything changes from one playthrough to another. And for instance, on my first playthrough, I got Fuko's ending, but I was already dating Nagisa. It was really funny, a funny thing to watch, because I really felt like I was living in that school for that time. So it was a great common route. You can make your choices. But when you mentioned, like when you have one day, one scene that really tells you, hey, now you're going to this one route. Well, it's not a problem, really. Katawa Shoujo, I really like Katawa Shoujo, so sorry if I start praising it too much, but the fact that you do have something to look for, there's a festival. Know something is going to happen or not in this festival. You really start planning how you're going to make your choices and what's really important. So it depends on the visual novel, on what's the focus of the routes themselves.
It's interesting to bring up Katawa Shoujo, because I'll kind of state a little opinion about that. I enjoyed Katawa Shoujo for the fact that that game felt like you could be complete with finishing a route. A lot of visual novels, especially the Japanese ones that are untranslated, have styles where you can finish a route, but there's so much foreshadowing and background to the other characters within the routes or before the routes that you're kind of like, well, what does, because all the routes in most visual novels play on the protagonist, which means, for example, in Grisaya, each one of the routes somehow reflects on the protagonist's past, and it doesn't just straight out tell you who the protagonist is. It gives you, I want to watch my spoilers here, but it gives you, elements of like the character's past, and then you piece all those routes together and you say, wow, this is who Yuji is in this case. It didn't just straight out tell me. It didn't go into many flashbacks about his past. It was all based on the routes and how you learned about who his character was and what he was about. Whereas Kachawa Shoujo it's very complete. You finish a route, you're like, man, I finished a route, I feel good. It's done. It's complete. I can call this game done unless I want to play another route and I want to learn about somebody, because then it's a whole fresh new game. It's not like, while they do play off of each other, the writers in Katawa Shoujo, because they were all separate writers, you can definitely tell they're just different stories within themselves. Sure, Emmy appears in Ren's route, or Ren appears in Emmy's route, but they're not necessarily like important characters to be able to understand what route you're in. And I like that format in some ways, but I think that can also, in the common sense, that can also lead to like common routes. Let's try to keep it on common route theme here.
Yeah, both can work
So-
pretty well. Citizen Kane was like, if Citizen Kane was a visual novel, you had many routes, and each route would tell a part of a story, and it would be fine too.
What do you two think, Down and Major? Do you like, I guess now that we're on that, do you like common routes that are kind of like, don't piece together who the protagonist, do you like all the background character story of the protagonist and things like that to be reflected in your common routes, or do you really like it to be down the routes? Like, obviously the routes are the character development. You're going to learn about the heroine or whoever you're after, or if you play boy games, then you'll learn about the male, whatever you play. But like, which do you prefer? Do you prefer games where you can play around and be like, man, I'm satisfied, or do you prefer games that's like, man, I want to play everything because I want to understand everything?
Yeah, actually, we were talking about that with Katawa Shoujo, and I actually really like that. I really preferred, just being able to read it once and then being done with it, because that's all I did for that game. I read it once and I loved it, and I'm done with it. Yeah.
I think one of the things people said is once they went down, finished the common and went down a route, they were like, I can't cheat on my it's too much feeling. I'll feel too terrible because I'll know what happens, and then I'll be like, no. Which it is funny because in Emmy's route, Rin foreshadows what happens in her route, and it's funny, and you're like, oh no. And I won't go into the spoils or anything, but yeah. What about you, Down? What do you think? What do you prefer?
Well, I don't really prefer one over the other. I like how it's done in Katawa Shoujo, but when you have, like you mentioned, foreshadowing of other routes in a specific route, and you have to read everything to understand, it's pretty interesting too, because you really have the impression that the game is one big story and not several different stories.
Okay, fair enough. All right, we can kind of step on what makes a good common, but how about this? Let's kind of flip the switch here and change it up. So how much common route do you think is too much common route, and what sorts of elements lead to bad common routes? So instead of the positive side of things, what don't you like about common routes? How long is too long, or how short is too short? Because a lot of times when I read commons, I really get into the story and enjoy it. I'm like, wow, I don't even need a route. But then you're like, oh, it's over, and you feel really depressed because it's over. I've heard that a lot from people too. So let's kind of flip that. How much common do you think is too much? What sorts of elements lead to other common routes? Any one of you guys can butt right in. Sorry, I guess I'll reformat it. So we kind of talked about how good common routes are. Like, what do you think makes a good common route? What do you think makes bad common routes? Like time-wise, element-wise, like too many jokes of something. Like, what do you think makes a bad common route? And do you know any bad common routes? You're just like, oh, I hate reading through this.
Well, obviously it has to be long enough so that you actually care about the characters when you enter the worlds, but it has to be short enough so that you don't get bored of silly jokes and you want a real story or whatever. I think, for example, it's not really a common route, but in Ever 17, the routes have a lot in common, and I think it's pretty problematic in the first 4 routes, not the 2 routes, because there's really way too much redundant text, and it's always the same thing, and you feel like you're reading the same thing. It gets tiring.
Okay. All right. It's interesting. Anybody else? Palace, Major?
I'm thinking it through. Give me a couple of seconds.
Yeah, I guess a common route, it has to be long enough, for your initial development or whatever. But I really do. I get bored of those things quick if they don't cut to the point. So it has to be short for me. Like, well, not so short, but
Okay.
Yeah, I have to agree with you guys. The shortest, the better, depending on the structure, once again. But if it gets too long and you don't know where you are going, if there's no foreshadowing of anything at all, it gets really boring and you don't know
right.
what the hell you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So along those lines in common routes, here's a kind of a follow-up question. I don't know how many of you played, for example, Little Busters. I never want to spoil anything in these podcasts, but in that, as you go through the game, elements change. Little Busters is just an example. There are other games as well where when you go back through the common route, they might add a scene, which isn't as impressive, but they might add completely new dialogue, they might add completely new scenes you haven't seen. Do you enjoy that, where it kind of adds the flavor? Because a lot of the times when you finish a route, you're like, okay, I got to skip the whole common because got to get back to the next route. Like, don't want to reread all this. But then there's like, oh, completely like original, like full-on scenes and like many scenes and lines and stuff. And Little Best is just one I can think of as an example. But do you like that, where you have to like go back and find it? Because the skip feature will stop on unread lines, which is, we'll get into that a little later. But what do you think of that?
I prefer not to backtrack as much as possible. It's just something I don't like doing. So if it could not do that, it's something I prefer.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really like going back because even if you have a skip function, it really breaks the pace of the game.
I do like when you have new stuff, as long as it feels fresh. A new CG is just... But if there's a new CG that really makes all of your experience in the common route become something else, then I really like it.
Okay. Let's see if I got anything else on this. Well, it looks like we covered all that in there. I mean, I guess the last question I can ask about just common route stuff is there's a lot of main heroines in games sometimes. Sometimes they have a lot of screen time. Usually on the openings of a visual novel, you're introduced to the first hero and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the main character. Like in Kokoro Function, for example, it's Mina. It's like the whole like first part of the game is just scenes with her, and you're like, well, this is clearly the main character. But then you realize, like, wow, she kind of just became like a backdrop character as the common route went on. I mean, not really a backdrop character; she still is important, but it's like not as impressive as it was when they introduced them. Do you like games that really try to lean you toward the main heroine, or do you kind of like games where it's like, hey, everybody has got their time in the game?
Yeah, I would rather them give everyone their screen time. Just lay it out and then let me pick instead of trying to.
I mean, because like as you're saying, like Otawa Shoujo did that. Like when you played, I didn't feel like there was more emphasis on any one character than any other
right.
one. But like sometimes when you play like Dracarite, it's like, oh, Mew, clearly you're the main character, and you're really emphasizing you're the main character because you're like in every common route scene so far. Like, you can definitely tell that they lean more toward that, but then like Otawa did a better job of it. So I don't know. I just want to know your guys' opinion on it.
very
Well,
good question.
If you focus too much on the main heroine, there's the risk that you're just not going to care at all about the other routes except hers.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we can lead right into the next question here. So we talked about common routes and things we like, things we don't like, just kind of things like that. But we did kind of branch into route discussion as well. So that will just be a great segue, I guess. So here's a question. Routes play one of the most important roles in a visual novel. Routes are basically a visual novel most of the time. Not every game, though. Ignoring the personalities of the characters as best you can. So trying to ignore, like, hey, I like characters like this, or I like characters like this, because that's not our focus here. What sort of route formats do you enjoy the most, and why? Do you enjoy kind of like the You Found True Love? Do you, if it's the high school setting, which is a lot of Japanese situations, like in anime and stuff like that, do you enjoy just getting into the relationship, and then you're like, wow, I learned about the character, we solved some kind of, when you think about it, pointless drama? Or do you really like, oh my gosh, this really plays a crucial role to the story? Like some things it's just like a moege or whatever, you just get the basic, and pardon me if I butchered that completely in that pronunciation, you get kind of the, just like, hey, there's some drama. Okay, cool, like, it's drama, but it's really not like something you can't just get over in a week. Like, when you think about it, like in real life situations. But then there's ones that are like, oh my gosh, this relates to the plot. Oh my goodness, like this is really well. It's not, but it's focusing on the character, but it's also focusing on the plot as well. So kind of like that. Do you like the whole marriage aspect at the end? Do you like the whole, like, hey, we jumped ahead 10 years and now we're married, we have kids or something? Like, do you feel good about that? Stuff like that. And then I guess, do you enjoy choices that lead to good and bad routes? So, for example, do you like choices in routes? And do you like being able to fail and go down a bad route and then feel miserable about yourself? Katawa. Or do you feel like going down where you can choose like good routes too? So I guess we'll just open with the basic question. What sort of route formats do you enjoy the most, and why? And I'll open this question up as major to start, so you can go ahead. If anyone else has an opinion too, if he's really stumped, you guys can jump in.
Yeah, I'm stumped. Hold on.
Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the structure I found most interesting so far was from Fate Stay Night. It wasn't forced, and you had to play one route to get to another and playing from the start, but it was really, really smart because you saw everything else in the past route with new eyes. So it was like climbing up a set of stairs, but facing down, so you see everything else from a new perspective. And this was, I think it was the best structure I've seen. But when you have a branching structure, I really prefer that you get to a route and you stick with it. And unlike a lot of what happened at Canal, the routes really can intersect with one another, so that you end up a little confused, and sometimes the visual novel loses the focus. So it's best when there is a route, and from this route you can reach multiple endings. So in this sense, yes, I do like bad ends, as long as you were given enough information to know what you were supposed to do, and the moral questions are given to you at the right times.
Okay. Man, I guess I'd spoil if I said this, but there's a visual novel. I'll just say this. I won't even say the name. There's a visual novel that, it's funny you bring that up, there's a visual novel that has choices about, like, the sport of Mahjong, and if you incorrectly choose the answers about Mahjong and you know nothing about it, you literally get down the bad ending, which we'll go into choices later, but
I think I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, I just remember hearing that. I'm like, I know nothing about the sport, which is like, that is the end. You said, give enough information. I feel that's not enough information. It's just something
that's unfair, really unfair, really.
Yeah.
I personally would not, put bad endings in a visual novel. I can't stand it. But yeah, I guess if they're going to, they just need to make it really clear. Which at that point, I don't know why they would put them in, because I don't know who in the right mind would pick the bad ending on purpose. So.
And we'll get to choices. We'll get to choices here with another question. It's just because that's interesting. I'll keep that point in mind. So remind me if I forget. It's just, like with bad choices, like they're making it a video game almost. It's like, why even have bad endings in the first place? You got to question that. So we'll get into that in a little later. But Don, what do you think in terms of root formats? What's your favorite? What do you enjoy?
Well, I don't think I have particular preference, but on the topic we were on about bad endings and choices, I do like sometimes the bad endings, but one thing I think is really cheap is when basically you reach the end of the route, and then you have a choice, and it's basically choose A if you want to have the sort of bittersweet ending, and choose B if you want to have the good endings where they end up together and have kids and are happy forever. I think it's a bit cheap because you don't stick to one end and you say, yeah, it could also be a happy ending.
That's an interesting point, because I know, like, I personally have a big problem with, like, root formats and having a good ending and a bad ending choice. Especially if it's just like one choice, it's like, well, everything lies on this, and some of the choices are really difficult. Like, this seems like a fair thing to say, and then it's like, just kidding, you died, or something ridiculous happens. You're like, I'm sorry, how does saying that I went to the park is gonna kill, like, what? And it's just like extremely dramatic, some of the endings, and you're just like, geez, okay, well, I guess I'm dead or something, and you're like, that's cool. So I don't like those in routes where they're just like ridiculous drama, and you're just like, this is such a lighthearted novel, and then you just are like, whoop, you got in a car accident or something, and you're like, why? Which
flags are for?
Yeah, which is another huge Japanese thing, but that's a completely separate topic. That has nothing to do with our topic, but just kind of a fun point is that suicide stuff and death is a huge thing in like Japanese visual novels. It always is. And in real Japan, suicide is also a huge problem, but that's a completely different topic. But that's just really interesting how they've pushed that into some visual novels. And I can think of names right now, but it's not the topic, so don't worry about it. Anyways, so do you guys enjoy, looks like we answered most of it here. Do you enjoy, what is your ultimate goal out of a route? What do you hope to accomplish when you finish a route? What do you say at the end where it's like, man, I felt good? Do you just like solving some drama and being like, sweet, I'm done? Or do you like, man, I really want to fall in love with the character. Man, I'm really, aiming. Obviously when you read them, like you want to read something and walk away satisfied, or what makes you walk away satisfied, I guess is the best question here.
Yeah, the hero's got to get the girl. That's how it's got to end.
Okay, interesting way to put it. Anyone else?
Usually, go ahead.
I'm still thinking. I don't know yet. There are many objectives, possible objectives.
Don't feel embarrassed if you say something. You're just like, man, I really just want to get the sex. Okay, that's what you play the game for.
Whatever the happy ending with the romance. I guess that's all I'm looking for. Whatever.
Some people like to just go for the H scenes. I'm not one of those people, but like in the end, I do go, okay, my objective is to start dating this girl and have the sex. That's really what the point of the game is in some respects, but sometimes it's not. Because like sometimes you don't go down that. Along those lines, I guess I'll kind of put in a throw topic here. I really enjoyed one of my favorite visual novels of all time, actually, is Shara no Kuni, because I love Shara no Kuni's structure. A lot of people argue that it's really bad, and that's fine. But I enjoy it because literally it really focuses on the story, and it has like a giant common route where the whole game is pretty much a common route. There are routes, but it's so like when you go down a route, there's barely any scenes with with the person you go down. All you get really different in that game is like an epilogue, and it's so small and short, and it doesn't even really matter that much. But like, it's interesting because it actually feels to me like you are dating the person, because in all essence, it doesn't block out the rest of the characters. And this is something I guess we can go on with routes. One thing I don't like about routes is when you go down one and it blocks out other characters. This did this a lot, for example, in Katawa Shoujo, which was one thing I do not like about it, is that when you get down a route, every other character becomes moot. All their stuff that you learned about them in common, you're like, well, now I never know what happens to them. And yeah, it's saying go down their route to find out. But then it's like, I like it where they still throw in the characters while still making the route original. And Shara no Kuni does an excellent job of that, because it still focuses on all the characters, even though you're still kind of like going down someone's route. So there's extra scenes that reflect on that route, but there's still the main story, and it doesn't just completely block out every character and just focus on the drama of one person. Because that's the whole dating thing, but that's, that's what I like. So I don't know if anyone enjoys that.
I completely agree with you. And I really missed Amy when I was in everyone else's room, because she's so funny and liked her. But
and that goes back to that common route thing too. It's that too much. If you give me too much screen time of a character, I'm gonna fall for them and be like, wow, I really like this character. And then you go down a different route, and then you're like, well, that's unfortunate, because now I have to go back and play the game again, and you're really bummed. So, I mean, that's one thing I always try to keep an eye out for. But okay, any other thoughts about routes, or just common routes, or just the structures of games? Okay.
One last thing I'd like to add.
Sure.
About bad ends, maybe you don't do it on purpose, but you are a little rewarded for getting it when it gives you additional information that either prevents you from getting another bad end later on, or gives you some small information about the overall universe of the story, which is interesting and really doesn't make it completely frustrating.
Okay, I'll ask one more question, because you just made me think of a question now, kind of along these same lines. What do you think about like CG unlocks? And I say that because like sometimes you have to go down the bad ending to get 100% in the game. Katawa Shoujo does this. A lot of other games do this, and you're like, man, I really don't want to see the bad ending because I know what happens, or it's really depressing, or it's really messed up, or it's really, sad, but you have to do it to get like a certain CG. I mean, do you like that? Do you think it's completely just like a huge fuck you, to the face, or something like, hey guys, you get to watch a bad ending, and you just are like, these people are terrible? Or, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, if they do that, where they, make it so you have to go down a bad end to get to CG, then I just never bother.
Fair enough.
I'd rather not.
Major never gets 100% in games. Confirmed.
I never have. I never will.
I try playing games where they're full, but yeah. What about you, Dan? Any thoughts on it?
Well, I don't really care either about 100%. Usually if it's really not an important bad ending, I won't bother playing it.
Fair enough. I'm a big completionist, so I'm always one of those guys like, gotta get 100%. And then some people are just like,
that's understandable.
Yeah, some people just play it and they're like, I'm satisfied, and then they just have a game sitting there and they're like, yeah,
that's me.
All right.
That's me too.
Oh, too much of a completionist.
But
okay.
The game doesn't really have to say, hey, you didn't get 100%, did you know? It's really bothersome. Why don't you just leave me alone?
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. All right, well, I guess we can move on kind of like to a couple completely turn around on the topic, but still in the same thought of visual novels. So let's talk about user interface. As time progresses, and as more future VNs have been released, and especially when I was in Japan and have seen some of the VNs, there are some UI elements that change throughout time. Obviously, older games have different UI elements, and now they've added animations into the games where they actually have anime for like cutscenes and CGs, and then there's like character movement as you're on the screen, and you're like, oh my goodness, all this stuff happening. Where most games is just still sprites, text, boom, done. Renpai classic program right there. But this is they've obviously added more as time has gone on. So, what are some UI options that you believe are crucial to have in a VN, and why? And what are some elements of UI that you just absolutely despise, in terms of like what you don't like ever seeing it, it bugs you, it annoys you, and things like that. And I guess I'll open this question up to Paulus to start, because you're the only one that hasn't started yet. So go ahead.
I'm really neutral about this. I mean, I don't really mind features, the technical features, but I do like it when they are integrated. But I know many people don't like StyleGate interface, and I know why would one think this, but I really like that the way we interact with the story is the same way you interact with the game, and I think have more of this really.
Okay, because StyleGate uses the phone system, right?
Yeah, I forgot.
Yep.
Okay. It sounds all about the cell phone stuff. It reminds me of like GTA, when I played like GTA 4 for a while. Everyone calls me and you're like, I'll meet you up at the whatever. So I could see where they were trying to go with that, I guess, but probably wasn't copying that. But all right, it's interesting. Yeah, anyone else? I mean, I guess I could say some stuff. I really enjoyed the sorry, I got a dog. I really enjoyed the some of the UI elements in like Kokoro Function, for example, which I recently just played, which is a really recent visual novel that was released last year in October, I believe. And they add like animation and they add like just certain elements. It's very basic, but it's very like clean and crisp in terms of how they do things. I mean, you have all the options of skip text, text speed and all that stuff, basic common stuff, which I think is necessary in the game. But they also there was something that they did and another game did that I remember talking to somebody about, where like when you the skip feature, jumping back to scenes that instantly load things for you. Some old visual novels I played don't have this, but a lot of times you can just jump right back to the scene, get the original sprite, and go back in where the music was and all this and all that. Where a lot of times just doing the scroll wheel isn't always as effective, because you don't just, it's odd just to read the text if you miss something. So that's something I like. I mean, any thoughts?
Right, yeah. I like that too. Like, I'm playing StyleGate, and I can't do that. I can't jump back to a scene. I can just get the backlog of the text.
Yeah.
That annoys me.
Okay, right on. Anyone else?
Well, I probably haven't played enough recent visual novels, because I'm really not used to good user interfaces like you mentioned. I actually don't remember playing a visual novel where I could actually jump back to scenes in the backlog.
Okay, interesting. That's something. I mean, I guess because you can't really think of any good things you like. Are there any things you just... I mean, this is more of an easier question, I guess. This is an easier question. Are there any things you just hate in UI? Just like, oh my gosh, why I hate this. Like, for example, I hate in Hoshi Memo that when you skip the common route, it jumps into the route. It doesn't stop when the route happens. You're supposed to skip unread text, but every time you jump, it just continues. So thank goodness you know where the scene is, because like it just will jump past, and you'll be like, am I in the route? And then you'll be like, oh, I'm in the route for like 10 minutes now, and then you realize that you like have basically skipped the entire game. So that's one thing I
haven't really noticed anything that really stuck out to me that I dislike. So.
Okay.
Nothing I hate.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty. If you don't really got any opinions on this topic, you can say it. I mean, like we can go to another question too. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that the more I play, I notice things, because I'm a big nitpicky person. Not really in terms of like story, but I'm nitpicky about how my game is structured. Because like you can play the old Mass Effect 1, if any of you have played it, and you're like, wow, this gameplay is kind of shit and really bad. And then you play like Mass Effect 2, and you're like, oh, they really improved the combat system and the story. And you're like, geez, that was really clunky, and there was way too much in the first one. And people don't realize that, because like, oh, it's Mass Effect. And then you screw up your ending of the entire game, and then there's huge controversy. Whatever. That's another topic. But I don't know.
It
That's
also
just
has a really strong opinion on this. Zakamut from the forums has a blog, and I think it was him who said, I hate any game that doesn't have infinite save system feature. And I was like, wow, is that really important? Really, really important?
That's interesting.
To
I mean,
him,
this
that
is a little off topic of visual novels, but I guess we can kind of just do a little minute rant here. It's interesting because there's games that I like it where you have limited saves, like in Resident Evil, because you feel the tension and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to pick and choose. It's really easy on easy mode once you know how to do Resident Evil, but if you play those old games like on the GameCube on hard mode, and there's like no ammo, zombies just one shot you, and you're like, my goodness, I really need to pick and choose when I save because I have 2 ink ribbons, and you're like, oh my gosh, and like it's hard. And then like in the later games they became more action and stuff like that. This is a little tangent right there, so I mean, I don't know, but all right, we can move on to another question, I guess, if don't really got anything on UI. So another question we got is we kind of were starting to talk about it when we were talking about routes and kind of with common route choices. So when one thinks of a visual novel, making choices often comes to mind, and this is what separates it from a normal book. So you say it's a choose your own adventure game almost. It's one way I describe it to my friends, but not really. How much do you think choices play an important role in making a visual novel a good visual novel? What are some examples of choices that you enjoyed? Do you think it's okay to put filler questions into the choices you make, such as, hey, we're going to the park. Do you get a hot dog or a donut? And you're like, well, what the heck does this have to do with anything? Like, it doesn't, right? Or do you enjoy it? Like, might do a CG change, or do you enjoy like convoluted choices? Like, how much choices do you think play a role? And if you can remember back to some of our route discussion, we were kind of the good ending, bad ending. Like, do you like choices in the final, parts of the route? I mean, stuff like that. So I guess I'll open this question to anybody that wants to talk about it. So go ahead when you're ready.
Well, basically, I think there are 2 good ways to do this. Either put very few choices, or put really a lot of choices. In the first case, you just put choices to branch off into other routes, offer alternative endings, and on the other for the other case, you put a lot of choices so that the reader has the impression really to explore the story. Like there are one setting and lots of possibilities, and you have to make your way through all those possibilities to get like an ending. But the middle ground is usually not very good because you have lots of choices that are basically useless and doesn't bring anything, and you still feel the need to try out the 2 choices because don't know if there could be something interesting in either of them, and in the end it's useless, and that's really frustrating.
Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else?
problem. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I really do like visual novels without choices as well. Active novels, whatever. But either you put only essential choices, or you really player enough space for him to make his own way through the story. I really like when you feel like it's living through it, or when you make only the essential. But the fact is, the player doesn't know which ones are filler or not. I like filler choices, but there's a time and a place for them. There are many times, I don't know how much I can spoil for Fate Stay Night, but there's one time and then there's one choice that really feels like it's important, and you just stop playing and go take a walk to the side, and then it's not really important in the end. But it feels like this. I don't mind it really, but it can get really frustrating if you do go back and make the other choice.
Okay.
Yeah, overall overall Type Moon games have a lot of trollish choices where a stupid choice can get you killed for nothing, and choices that seem really important are actually just not important.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to bring up, like when I was reading Little Busters, and I felt like I was making a lot of choices that didn't really matter, and yeah, I don't like that at all. I would rather them just, stick to the point with the choices.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because a lot of the recent visual novels have just like, not really recent too, but there's a structure of 2 flags per person. Most amount of flags gets the route is basically how it works. I've noticed that a lot in, I think Kokoro Function has that. They have 5 heroines, they have 10 choices in the common route, and each one pertains to, one of the characters. So like you miss one, that doesn't count as a flag. And then it adds up the total points, and whichever person has the most points. If they're all tied, sometimes you'll either the game ends, or you get a bad ending, or you get a default route, like just the default route. I think like even in Greece, Saya, if you don't get any endings, you get down one of the girls' routes, just default, because it's the last one on the list. So like you can't fail in that, so it's kind of like one of those things. But Gusai's structure was different. I don't want to spoil all that for you, but so that's kind of interesting to note. But like you guys were saying, the convoluted choices too. It's a fine line for me. Like I like them, but I don't like them. So I mean, all right. So we kind of talked about that. I mean, do you think? I mean, how many like? I guess what can I? Do you like? I guess this is kind of back on the roots topic, but this was something that was interesting, and so I'm kind of going to backtrack here a little bit. In routes, when you make choices, do you like seeing different points of view throughout the game? This kind of has nothing really to do with choices so much as it does have to do with just routes and the structure of the game in general. I forgot to mention this, but like when you go down a route, what I really enjoyed, again, I'm really appealing back to Kokoro Function. It's the first untranslated visual novel I've ever played. It really goes a lot into different characters' points of view, especially the heroine's point of view, and you really kind of see things from their standpoint, where a lot of times in old visual novels it just maintained the protagonist's monologue. There was occasional times it went into the heroine's monologue, but most of the time it just maintained, main character monologues. So like you have no idea what that person was thinking about that certain situation, or you would know based on like the scenes and context around it, but you don't really piece it together as well as say like, hey, now we're in this girl's point of view and it's completely what they're thinking. I mean, this kind of backtrack like I said, but what do you guys do about that? Do you like different points of view, or do you just like to keep it in a protagonist because you connect yourself with the character?
Well, I don't think I've ever read a visual novel where I've experienced that, but, I wouldn't mind it, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Okay, so you guys really haven't played many visual novels. It's definitely, this also even goes on to the future VNs that get released. And this isn't, again, UI, but it does kind of relate to all this and every question in a way, in that like it's something more recent visual novels do, where they put different points of view because they realize, hey, maybe we don't need to just have the protagonist viewpoint on this. We can have other like, what does the girl think about this, and it really helps you connect with the characters more. I think that's something that's really good as an element. Again, that was a sidetrack from the question we were on, but just kind of throwing in some stuff there.
But it's a great question, really. It really depends. Sayonota had a small section in which you had another point of view, but by then you were already connected with someone. Either you were connected with the protagonist, or you were connected with whatever else. So it's a choice in which you have to choose from protagonist perspective, even though it's another point of view. So, but it's a good thing that you may have other points of view. I have never seen a visual novel with third-person perspective, and maybe something to do.
It's not necessarily third person. It's more you are now the heroine. That is the protagonist.
Yeah. But that's
So it's first person
one
for
step
them.
further, really.
Yeah, it's first person
Yeah,
for them.
first person for like what is that? Like Twilight. But I think it's nice. It's nice. It's a nice, fresh way of
But
writing.
do you mean like do they switch the point of view during the same scene, or there are scenes from one point of view and then you switch to another scene and it's another character?
Both, actually. It'll sometimes do it the latter way, like you said, where they just switch points of view, and then it's just like it doesn't even say like this is from this character. You just kind of learn it. You think the protagonist is still talking, but you're like, oh wait, no, we're not. This is not the protagonist speaking. This is this girl's point of view, and this is what she's doing right now. Or there's also in the middle of a scene, I've seen it where they've switched points of view straight out. I mean, and it's you can pick up on it. It's a little more difficult, especially without like the change in saying this person's speaking or this person's speaking, because monologues don't have character names above their text bars. It's just monologues. But like, usually you can base it off of when they start speaking, and then they'll be like, and then I said this, and you'll be like, oh, okay, so this person is the one thinking right now. So kind of both. I've seen it happen in both. I've seen it happen, I think, in an H scene once, or like near an H scene too, which was very interesting because they'll switch points of view, and you'll like literally like be like, oh, I'm not the protagonist now. And like I said, I don't read H scenes, but like the after the fact and like before the fact, they switch points of view. Like, how does the female feel about this, or how does the male feel about this? And I really think that helps connect with every character in the story. So that's kind of what I was. So both is your answer.
Yeah, that does sound interesting. I don't think I've ever played a visual novel where there's really a lot of character switching. I've played Sayano Uta, but it didn't strike me as very important. But for example, to take a book example, in the Game of Thrones books, every chapter is written from one character's point of view, and it brings a lot of interesting stuff, really. So I think it could be interesting to do that in visual novels too.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, we got about 5 minutes left here, so we can kind of wrap up. I mean, is there any other... Going back, we talked about common routes, we talked about the UI, we talked about the choices, we talked about the routes. Is there anything that you thought of that you want to go back to? I mean, any other additional questions you want to ask or something interesting? I mean, anything you guys want to finish up with?
Nothing really.
Yeah, I can't think of anything.
Well, poo. All right. I guess I'm trying to think. Okay, well, I can't really think of any other questions. I mean, if there's really it, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I can't really think of anything. Okay, guys. Well, we can end it there then. I mean, it's usually I give it take 5-10 minutes for each podcast at the end, so it's a little fine if it's a little bit shorter. Some podcasts are a little bit shorter, but we just give that hour length just for cutoff purposes. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming. Enjoyed having you all. And this is, like I said, for those who are watching the podcast, one of 3 that's being recorded today. So I got 2 more other after this. Yay! And so we'll try to post those up by the end. We'll get a little more details on that. But gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me, and thanks
for having us.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.